And I'm Rugel.
And you're listening to Fermented Files.
Welcome to the 4th episode, in which we will be, as per usual, discussing themes of violence, gory, murders, and all of the good stuff. So if you're in any way sensitive to the aforementioned, please leave now.
Or don't.
So, today I will start my episode with a question for you.
Okay.
And I feel like I know the answer, but in case I don't, that's going to be really embarrassing. Have you ever watched the very popular, very well-known show that most of our generation has seen, which is known as Dexter?
Oh, yes.
Do you like it?
Oh, yes.
Do you love it?
I love it.
Okay. What did you think about the last episode?
I don't remember the last episode.
Okay, fair enough. So, that might then, as a fan of Dexter, this episode might be right up your alley, because what we're going to be discussing today is actually the real-life inspiration for Dexter. One of the most prolific... Actually, funny thing, they say it's one of the most prolific killers in Brazil or South America, but actually I checked today and he's the 7th most prolific serial killer in the world. So today we're moving out of America, which has become a bit of a theme.
Yeah.
And we're going, as you might have guessed, to Brazil. And our main character is Pedro Rodrigues Filho, who was also known as, well, first, the South American Dexter, also as Lil Petey or Killer Petey. Pedrinho Matador, literally, obviously Brazilians speak Portuguese, as we know, and I think Pedrinho Matador literally means small killer.
Okay.
Because, as you can guess, he was small in stature. Yeah. Little boots. So let's just get into it. So Pedro Filho, which I will be referring to him probably in all of the aforementioned names, because I just forget, was born in 1954 on the 17th of June, which I believe makes him a Gemini. Again, one of the 2 star signs associated with most serial killers, so are we shocked? No. And he was born near Santa Rita, which is in the southeast of Brazil. Not that that means anything to us. Okay. So Pedro was the oldest of 7 siblings, and as you can probably assume, now knowing that he is a serial killer, his childhood was not happy.
Shocking.
His father, Pedro Sr., he worked as a security guard at a school, but at home life he was just extremely abusive, and actually Pedro could have easily not been born at all, because while his mother was pregnant with Pedro, his father beat her up so severely that Pedro then, as a consequence, was born with severe skull deformities. So he was born with deformed prefrontal cortex, which, as we might know or might not know, I learned this today, impacts decision-making and social behavior modulating, which is kind of consistent with, a psychopath, a serial killer. Anyway, Pedro was also raised in a part of Brazil that was relatively poor and extremely dangerous. He was surrounded by violence, and I was reading this book about him. It's like 3 chapters of the book about him. But anyway, someone from his town said that in the town where he grew up, there was a saying, like a popular saying, that God must exist because the devil lives in their town.
Oh.
So it was rough,
It's a nice neighborhood.
Yeah. So even though his father was extremely abusive and the mother was sort of abused, together with, his brothers and sisters, he found his escape with his grandparents, where he spent most of his time when he could. His grandparents taught him a lot of useful skills. His grandfather taught him how to swim, how to harvest, how to butcher, hunt, stuff like that. And his grandmother, on the other hand, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that relates to like the olden cultures of the South America, but his grandmother taught him essentially that drinking ox blood makes you essentially invincible or like stronger.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of the Mayans and when they would throw the best soldiers like hearts of the pyramids, and then whoever got it they would eat it and they would take the strength. But anyway, so he was taught a lot of fun things by his grandparents. Yeah. And you will not have to wait very long, and I know it's unusual in our conversations. You're not going to have to wait very long, and we're just going to go right into Pedro's main business, which is being a serial killer. So at the age of 13, at the ripe age of 13, in 1967, he got into a fight with his cousin. I think there was something about a horse that Pedro potentially took from the cousin without asking him, and then the cousin found out. And what he did was essentially the cousin punched Pedro in the face. Pedro immediately sort of switched on, looked at his cousin, and was like, "I'm going to kill you for this." Okay. But because he was small, as I said, and sort of not very strong at that time, his cousin just laughed at him and punched him again, and then that sort of became like a family joke, about him being weak, and like everyone was essentially bullying him for it. So he became a bit of a laughingstock in his family. So what he did, he didn't do anything immediately. He waited for his time, and that kind of becomes a trend of his later in life as well. So he waited until his cousin and Pedro were working at helping the grandfather in the farm where they all worked, and they were near a sugarcane press, which I don't know exactly how they work, but I understand that there's essentially like big cogs that you put stuff like in between, and then they just like press it, and it just looks really big and scary, I guess. So when his cousin wasn't looking, he pushed him into the sugarcane press where his arm got stuck, completely mangled up until the shoulder. And Pedro was like, no, this is not it. Like, he's screaming, whatever. So what he did, he tried to get his cousin's head into the press as well. He couldn't, fully do that because, again, the cousin was much stronger. But then again, his hand was stuck in the sugarcane press. So what he did, he grabbed a machete, because obviously Brazil in the 70s, everyone has a machete. And started hacking at his cousin, trying to literally hack him into pieces. But then obviously the other workers at the farm finally got wind of what was going on, and they separated them. The cousin stayed alive, but without an arm. Okay. And Pedro was put into prison, but because he was 13 years old, they released him a few days later. Whatever, no one died.
Yeah.
Who cares? So that was his sort of first face-off with death, I guess.
Yeah.
And he was like, you know what? This is great. I like it. What happened later is in 1968, when he was 14, so half a year passed, sort of a tragedy happened in their family, and the tragedy was, I mentioned to you that his father, Pedro Sr., worked at a school as a night guard. And what happened is he got fired from the school because someone accused him of stealing the food from the cafeteria, which he was sort of looking after. So he got fired for that. That meant essentially no more income for the family. Mother couldn't stop crying. Everything's just, falling apart. So naturally, Pedro and the family knew that Pedro Sr. did not do this. And obviously he, said, no, absolutely not. It was someone else. So what Pedro did, faced with this great injustice, from what I understand, he just went away. He collected his tent, he collected a hunting knife or something, and he went away. He went away into the nature. Spent 30 days there, just chilling, trying to, connect to the nature. Then swiftly came back after about a month, went to the local government building where he found the vice mayor of the town, who was making the decisions of who to fire, who to not fire. And he shot him.
Shot him. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't find anywhere like information as to where he got the gun from, but I guess Brazil in the 70s couldn't have been that hard. No disrespect. And that was his first killing. Okay. And that is when, in his mind, the idea was born that he was like an avenger. Like, he didn't kill because he was a maniac. He killed people that disrespected his family, that wronged him, you know? He was like a vigilante of sorts. And what he did, after killing the vice mayor, he didn't just stop there. Obviously, at that point, somehow he knew, or I don't know if it was public knowledge, or he just tracked that information down somehow. It turns out that it was actually the day guard who stole the food from the cafeteria. So, what Pedro did, he snuck into school before he knew that this day guard will start his work. He ambushed the day guard, tied him to a chair, tortured him a little bit, shot him in the head, put him in the back room, covered him with chairs, and set the building on fire.
Okay.
Makes sense, right?
Oh, of course.
And that's it. And immediately, obviously, everyone was like, it's quite obvious who is the potential culprit.
Yeah.
So the police were now after Pedro. So Pedro did the only thing that was logical at that point. Again, I'll remind you, he was 14 years old. He simply went to São Paulo. Okay. In São Paulo, he met a lady called Booties. Not as in like a behind of a person, but booties, like shoes, like baby shoes, like tiny shoes. Booties was a wife of a deceased drug gang member, and she was actually now running a drug gang all on her own.
Oh.
And it so happens that she was also a sexual offender. So what she did, she met Pedro, took him back to her house, took his virginity, and then gave him a job at the drug cartel. Because they had this sort of, well, I guess you can call it a close relationship. Even though he was only 14 and he's never been like a part of a gang before, he immediately got sort of like higher up in the ranks as opposed to the guys that actually like worked to get up the ranks, which obviously no one really liked that, because like, what do you mean a 14-year-old being like superior to me? So what they did, the older guys, they sort of, I think, invited him to like a local pool or something as like a day thing, and then he went there, Pedro went there, and he saw that they were acting like super strange, and he was like, this is sus, and they tried to ambush him. There were 5 of them. They tried to ambush him and kill him, but in the end what happened is he accidentally killed 2 of them, and the other 3 ran away. Well, and by accidentally, I mean not accidentally, but like he killed them at the age of 14.
I was
again.
going to ask you how you accidentally kill someone.
So he shot 2 of the 5 guys, and the other 3 obviously ran away. That was about it. But obviously the town started speaking about it. They were like, you know, young blood, extremely violent. What do you mean? Like 14 years old doing all this stuff, gang killings, whatever. So, you know, he became almost notorious already. And he was just sort of progressing within the gang. He had 2 besties at the time, like also younger guys that were watching his back. He was watching their back. And this is like probably the most important and formative part of like why Pedro became who he became in the end. Him and his 2 besties from the gang actually met a drug dealer called China. China. And they were supposed to collaborate with him. But, and this is, again, this just speaks of Pedro's character. He just didn't like China. He was like, you are morally not up to my standards. Like, I don't like the way you work. I don't like the way you look. I don't like the way you operate. So he didn't like China. And because of that, he simply decided to rip him off. They essentially stole his guns, stole his drugs, and then sold them to another dealer who Pedro thought was up to his moral standards. And that's like this whole thing. And I'll tell you the most interesting part about Pedro, who is actually a superstar serial killer, but not in the way that you would think. For a serial killer, he's just like constantly banging on about his morals and how he's, you know, just like the best judge of character, and like how other criminals are not worthy, and if they're not, then he has to kill them and whatever. So yes, but long story short, he ripped off China, took his stuff, sold it to someone else. At this point, as I said, he was becoming like a bit of an urban legend in Sao Paulo. So not only the gangs, such as China's gang, were after him, but also the local police and the local sort of citizens, because, you know, again, you can imagine Brazil, people do their own like citizens justice, I guess, as you call. So everyone were sort of after him. He had to, because of that, start sleeping in like cemeteries and like parks and stuff, just like always sort of like on alert, trying to, you know, not get caught and killed. Eventually, it all ended with the police, raiding Booty's gang, his friend's sexual predators gang. And during that time, she was shot and Pedro was injured, and he was like, you know what, this is enough. So what he did, he once again packed his stuff, went back to live with his family. So even though he left Sao Paulo and went to live with his family temporarily, obviously, location, just like purely geographically, does not mean much to angry gang members and stuff. So he was still being pursued. Eventually he decided that it was too risky for him to stay with the family, and therefore left again, moved to a town called Campo Grande, which is near Rio de Janeiro. And that is where he met and fell in love with Maria Aparecida Olympia. He was 16 at this point. I'm not sure how old she was, but they started a relationship, and really quickly she fell pregnant. And at that point they moved in together. And as they were living together at this point in time, his full-time job was essentially stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, stealing from what he considered to be bad drug dealers and selling their stuff to good drug dealers, if there's such a thing. But, you know, that was his morals. That was his whole thing.
Okay.
Sadly, when Maria was 7 months pregnant, he came home and found her and the unborn baby killed, together with the guy who he had previously instructed to keep Maria safe. So he had someone like posted at the house at all times to like look after her. They were all killed. And this is a bit of like a motive that ties us to my second episode, or our second episode, which was the Daniel LaPlante, because there was a message on the wall, and the message in her blood again just said, "We will get you," obviously in Portuguese. So at this point, Pedro, all he could think about was vengeance. He spent almost a year making inquiries, torturing people that he thought might know something about, you know, who did this. Again, very much Batman shit, just like vigilante stuff, just like he's the good guy who's like fighting to find the truth and whatever. But he couldn't, he wasn't very successful. He couldn't figure out who might have killed his girlfriend or wife and the child, until one day he just simply went to like a bar, like a local bar, to, I guess, drown his sorrows. And that's where the owner said someone's looking for him. He said, a young woman is looking for you. And that woman turned out to be the ex-wife of China, who we've already met. So the disgruntled ex-wife was like, it was China. It was China who, you know, obviously because of what you did to him, instructed for your wife to be killed. She also, at the same time, let him know that China's brother was to be holding his own wedding the following weekend. Naturally, Pedro was like, this is my shot. We're gonna do good guy shit and avenge my dead wife.
Yeah.
So he got back in touch with his two besties from before, the same ones that ripped off China in the first place. They all just like grouped together and went to visit the wedding. He did actually instruct them, and this is like one thing that he always did maintain, like within his reign of terror, that he told them that all of the men, every single man in that wedding, should be killed, but not to touch a single woman or a single child, because they're, pure, innocent, whatever. So what they did, they arrived at the wedding, knocked on the doors of the main hall. The door was opened by China's father. They just freaking went in, guns blazing. The first one that Pedro actually shot was China himself. As everyone else in the wedding also belonged, or presumably belonged, to the gang, to Pedro they were all guilty as much as China was. So him and his two friends just shot and shot and shot. First using their own guns that they brought, then just sort of taking the guns from the people they've already shot. Then at the end of the day, Pedro killed 7 men and wounded 11 more. No, 16. Killed 7 men and wounded 16 more. No children, obviously, or women were harmed because they told them to go up and leave as soon as they came in. The only woman that was injured was China's mother, but Pedro then later in an interview said that was her own fault because she was trying to put her arms around China to not let him get shot. So this is what we refer to, and this was, mind you, early 70s, so way before Game of Thrones. This is the Red Wedding. As I was reading about it, I was like, this is literally the Red Wedding. Naturally, after the Red Wedding, because of the high profile of China and so on, the legends, in full swing, started to spread in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro and beyond. At this point, Pedro got his nickname, Pedrinho Matador, which translates to Tiny Killer. Little Pete the Killer.
Teeny tiny killer.
So at this point, he no longer he was still very paranoid about everyone that was out to get him, but at the same time he was now literally the most powerful dude in Sao Paulo. Everyone feared him because look what happened to China for just killing one woman. And in his own words, at this point he was basically killing every day, and if he didn't, he would get agitated. One interesting thing about him, and this is shooting people was all by the book stuff. One thing that he did that was kind of weird, if you remember what I told you about his grandmother and the ox blood, Pedro said that after he would kill people, he would drink their blood to get their strength, and to become invincible. So that's how he works. So I think at this time his total body count is about 10 people, wounded, God knows how many. Finally, in 1973, so at this point he's 18. This is 2 years after Maria was killed, he was finally arrested for a murder. So because Pedro at this point, after the Red Wedding, was so notorious, everyone was after him. One night he was just sitting at a bar which belonged to the father of the twins he was at that time in a polyamorous relationship with.
Oh.
The father obviously didn't want the daughters mess with Pedro, so he ratted Pedro out to the cops. And that is how finally he was arrested. Essentially, the police came into the bar. There was a huge fight. He ended up really badly injured, where I think he ended up in the hospital for 25 days. And then once he was well enough, they charged him with 18 murders. So I was wrong about the body count, but he was charged with 18 murders. And the funny part is he was surprised about it. He was 18 only? Cannot be that little. Finally, I think only 14 could actually be tied to him.
Yeah.
So he, for that, got 126 years in prison. Okay. The interesting part is, once he left the hospital and he was about to be transported to prison, the cops put him in handcuffs, put him in the police car. But before picking him up, they picked up another guy who was a rapist. So there's 2 guys in the car in the back seat, both handcuffed. Cops left for a bit to do whatever, God knows what, maybe paperwork or whatever, and when they came back, there was only one of them alive in that car. Because Pedro really didn't, he was still a vigilante. He was still fighting for good, killing the bad.
Yeah.
So he simply with his bare hands, I think, strangled because his thing was breaking necks. He obviously mostly he used shotguns because he was small, and guns would allow him to move fast and not have to physically fight. But he was apparently quite good at breaking necks as well. So,
With handcuffs.
yeah.
Okay.
That's the beauty of him. Like, I've watched a couple of his interviews. He's just like so tiny and so like kind looking. His voice is like so tiny, baby voice.
Oh.
But he's like the seventh most notorious serial killer in the world. But anyway, so that is when he went to prison. And sadly for you, that it doesn't end here. It only starts.
I hope so.
So the prison that he got into was called Araraquara and was one of the most notorious prisons in Brazil. At that time, obviously, Brazilian prisons were kind of known as potentially the worst places to be probably in the world, because gangs activity, everyone was like being pitted against each other, fighting within prisons, killing almost daily. The guards, there weren't really many guards, and if there were, they were like either sadistic or like easy to bribe. So when he got to prison at the age of 18, killer Petey, or Pedro, was very young, even by Brazilian standards, to be in prison. Because I think the average at that time was like between 25 and 29, and he was 18. So because he was so young and because he was so notorious, he immediately had a target on his back, because an overcrowded prison with probably hundreds of people who are somehow connected to people he's already killed.
Yeah.
And the media coverage of him was like insane. And as you know, in prisons, they always have the radios on just to like keep in touch with the outside world. So everyone knew he was, and he was immediately sort of essentially doomed for something for something bad for him to happen. Immediately on his first day, when they have the outside time and he was allowed to go outside into the courtyard, he was surrounded by 5 prisoners that presumably had beef with him for unspecified reasons. And what exactly happened is not clear, but according to eyewitnesses, he immediately, again, killed 2 of the 5, and the other 3 were wounded enough to no longer want to fight, so they just left him. And that's when he, I guess, established himself as like someone not to be messed with.
Do you know how they were murdered? He didn't have that gun.
No, so he did immediately, because he knew he had that target on his back. He immediately, when he went to prison, he found a way to make a shank.
Okay.
As he said, prisons, they had fucking heroin, cocaine, everything in there. It wasn't like difficult, not like these days. So he shanked 2 and the other 3 just ran away like, okay, bro. And that is part of why he became even more legendary. So his reign of terror sort of easily could continue. He would sometimes kill other inmates with shivs, shanks. Other times, as he said, he would use his hands. Breaking necks was his like main thing. However, I do have to say, and I think I didn't say this before, Pedro is what is called a missionary killer. So he always maintained that he only killed the ones that were like not up to his moral standards. Just people that he thought deserved to be killed. So he wouldn't, he could control himself. He wasn't like a serial killer or like a spree killer that, just, need to kill, I'll fucking shank everyone. Sometimes actually he would decide that someone needs to die for one reason or another. But if they were like very well protected or something, he would obviously wait for the best time. And in waiting, he would befriend them. He would share his food with them. He would share his belongings with them. And then eventually, when the time came, he would just murder them. One day, and this is probably one of the craziest stories of his time in prison. So one day he was visited in prison by his mom and his grandmother, because obviously they were still alive, and they always kept in contact. Because I don't know if I've expressed it anywhere, but like he was really big on family. That's why he avenged the father and whatever, even though the father was an abusive prick. And so that was it. They visited him. They went home. He smoked some weed with his cellmates. Went to bed. Woke up sort of in, like later at night, maybe like midnight 1 or whatever. And something was weird. He was like the cellmates were like looking at him weird and kind of like quiet. They turned down the radio a little bit. He was like, okay, went back to bed. The next day it continues. Everyone's like looking at him in a weird way, and like when he approaches them, they stop conversations, like change the topic very obviously, and I was like, that's weird. When I was reading this, I assumed that they were about to ambush him and like kill him. So the same day, the prison guard comes to him while he's exercising in the yard, and he's like, you need to go see the prison director now. And Pedro's like, I might have killed a lot of people in the prison, but he's never, like, I've never targeted any of the staff. Like, because they didn't do anything bad to him.
Yeah.
So he went to the prison director, and that is where he learned that his mother, Manuela, died. The same mother that he saw the day prior.
Okay.
She was actually stabbed 21 times and, like, mangled. And I think it was with, like, a machete that she was stabbed and then sort of slashed up. And it was actually his dad who did it.
Jesus Christ.
So his dad was arrested and convicted and put in prison. And so obviously what was happening with the cellmates, they were all super scared to tell him what happened. Because it was on the radio that she died, because it was, like, very bloody and whatever. And he was a star, so everyone reported his mom dying. It was on the radio, they heard it as he was asleep, and they were scared to tell him. So they turned down the radio and then were like, hush, hush.
Yeah.
So anyway, luckily for Pedro, his father was actually sent to the same jail, but in, like, a different, more highly secured part of it. And I imagine you can guess what happens next. One day, Pedrinho called the guard saying that, oh, I'm sick. When the guard came in, Pedrinho obviously had a knife with him. He threatened the guard with a knife, took his gun, took his keys, then using that gun, sort of gathered the other scarcely distributed guards, locked them up in one of the cells with a set of keys that he just got off the first guard, and he just made his way upstairs to the portion of the prison where his dad was. And his father didn't, like, object. He didn't do anything. Everyone was running away as soon as they saw Pedrinho coming in. His dad was just standing by the wall looking at him. And according to Pedrinho, his father simply said, "You're right, my son." And then obviously Pedrinho started stabbing. He counted every single stab and only stopped at 22, one more than his mother. What happens next, though, might come as a bit of a surprise, might not. He had one more promise to keep to his mother that he made when he briefly was sort of led to go to the morgue where she was and, like, saw her body. So he, after stabbing his dad 22 times, he started working away, reaching into his father's mangled chest and pulling out his heart. He then placed it on the floor, sliced off a piece of it, and bit into it, starting to chew. It wasn't nice. It was, like, very chewy and tough, like a bad steak, I guess. So he couldn't swallow it. What he does, he spat it out onto his father's body as, like, the final insult. And that's it. His job was done. He was once again the righteous vigilante. He lynched his mother and killed another bad, awful man. After doing this, he simply came back to his block, unlocked the guards, handed them the keys, the gun, and then the bloody knife, which he used to kill his father, and then just surrendered to be handcuffed and, like, taken away for presumably another sentencing or something. So at this point, and because he's obviously killed a lot of people in prison, you might remember he was initially sentenced for 126 years, but because they were then sentencing him also for the murders as he went along, at this point he had 400 years accumulated. So he was going to spend a long time in prison. So he was bored. There were a lot of bad people around him. So his killings continued. Another fun story is Pedrinho meeting Claudio, a fellow new inmate who needed protection. Pedro sort of was, as I said, self-proclaimed good guy. So he took Claudio under his wing, so much so that upon Claudio being released, because he wasn't there for, like, a big crime, Pedrinho gave him his grandmother's address and told him that he can stay there. Claudio, when he arrived at Pedrinho's grandmother's, fell in love with Pedrinho's sister, Silvana. Sadly, one night, Pedro's brother was being slightly unkind to Claudio, making jokes about Claudio and Pedro having sex in the prison. So Claudio got a bit upset, shot at the brother, but accidentally shot Silvana, the sister. Obviously, he went to jail for this. Then he came back to the same jail where Pedro was incarcerated. Luckily for him, Pedro was like, all good. I understand why that triggered you. Stuff happens. It's okay.
Such
Claudio
a
was like,
supportive king.
whew. So, it's all good for a few days. And then one day, Pedrinho visited Claudio in his cell. I think Claudio was studying, so he had his back to the door. So what Pedro did, he came up to Claudio, pulled his sort of head back, and immediately just fucking started hacking at his throat, stabbing, slashing, whatever, until the head literally separated from the body.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
But, so he was in more trouble. But, as ever, his sister was avenged. He was the good guy. Claudio, the bad guy, died. All good. All good in the hood. This is the interesting thing. So Pedro obviously left school at 13, shortly before he killed that vice mayor. So because he was so bored, he sort of just taught himself how to read and write. That's when he was finally able to read letters that people from the outside were sending him, and there were obviously many because, as I said, he was probably the first proper coverage so big of like a killer. So most of those letters, there were a lot of love letters. He boasted himself that he would get like 50 love letters a week, you guys. He's a big shot. But anyway, most of these letters were not love letters. They were people writing to him about people in the prison that he's in, saying, oh, they did that, this and that, can you kill him for me? So Pedrinho essentially became like not even a hired gun, because he did it just like to be the good guy, but essentially like a medium between like a gun for hire, I guess you can say. So that's what he did. He just started killing people that people asked him to kill because they were bad, which is fun. And he was, again, because the killings kept piling up, he was once again at some point being sentenced for like the few more killings that he did within the prison. The judge asked him for the reason of those killings, and his answers were borderline like mockery. He said, oh, I killed that one because he snored too loud, or I killed the other one because I didn't like his face. It's all fun. All good stuff. Fun. So in 1985, at the point where his accumulative sentence was over 400 years, he was transferred to a prison and psychiatric treatment center near São Paulo. That is because they were doing like psychiatric evaluations on him, and they were like, he's actually a fully fledged psychopath. Like, there is no remorse. He's never gonna stop killing. He needs to be like placed somewhere. So he was placed in the maximum security wing in this specialist prison. And that is when he stopped killing, because obviously he was segregated. He was in solitary confinement, even eating alone, again, after he tried to kill someone because he wasn't allowed to eat with everyone. So he stopped his killings, and he then actually remained in solitary confinement until 2002. Now, the funny and weird thing with Brazilian legal system is that they can get any sort of like sentences, 400 years, like Pedro got 600 years, 100 years, whatever. But because they counted, at some point when making the laws, they counted that Brazilian life expectancy is on average 43 years old, no one is allowed to serve over 30 years. So whatever sentence you get in 30 years, you're out. In 2003, it was obviously 30 years since he was arrested, so he could appeal. But the prison did not want to let him go. Obviously, he was dangerous, absolutely no remorse whatsoever. So they didn't want to let him out. But in the end, through fighting and appeal lawyers and whatever, he got parole. He was released in 2007, which makes his full served sentence 34 years, which is also the longest served sentence in Brazil. So he's special in more ways than one. Okay, you guys? He's a special guy.
He is a special guy.
He's a special guy. After he got released, he went down to southern Brazil and got a job as a keeper at a farm. And that's the funny thing. He started going to church, got a dog, his boss liked him very much, the neighbors loved him. Everyone said oh, he's so extroverted, so funny, so kind, so, you know, just a nice guy. And in 2011, he got arrested again. Not because he did anything in the span of 2007, 2011, but as I said, in the first place, the system didn't want to really let him go because of who he is. So they were like, well, while in the prison for those 34 years, he obviously participated in some riots and stuff. So they were like, we're going to charge you with, I think, unlawful imprisonment, because they took some guards into, you know, like custody for a bit and stuff like that. So they put him back in jail. He did not resist his arrest, simply asked to make sure that his Labrador is handed to his neighbor to look after.
Aww.
And actually his neighbors apparently cried when they found out that he's being put in jail again.
Jesus Christ.
The owner of the farm said, oh, whenever you get released, you have your job still, you know, just come back, whatever. So he kind of like, despite of being who he is, kind of made a good name for himself and was, I guess, not a bad dude, if you ignored the obvious.
Yeah.
So when he was arrested in 2011, he got a sentence of 8 years, but he was, again, very good in prison, didn't kill anyone else, so was released after 7 years in 2017. At this point, he was 64 years old. I think I didn't mention this before, but while in prison, he was like super fit. He would wake up at 4 a.m. every morning, like exercise, like super fit, youthful, in good shape. And he's had a bit of like a change of mind. In an interview after the second release, he just vowed that he was done killing, unless, of course, someone were to harm his family. And he did stay close with his family, and he potentially wanted a family of his own, attend church, as he said, just like a good guy. But that is like the interesting part. So when he was released in 2007, after 34 years, in between the 70s and like early 90s, obviously a lot has changed. You know, all the social medias, all of the big buildings, the cars, the trains, the automobiles, whatever. So he was shocked by how much the world has changed. And although it took him a while, he eventually learned to embrace the changes, especially social media, in which his story as a South American Dexter was told. Like, he was like glorified. He had so many supporters because he was the good guy, killing the bad guys. So that is where the story takes the most modern imaginable turn. So why is Killer Petey also called like killer superstars? You know, you've obviously had historically Ted Bundy, who is essentially the superstar serial killer, but in terms of what people made him. Other famous killers who were like giving interviews, but Killer Petey took matters into his own hands and not only took to Facebook, where he at one point had like 5,000 friends, he also started a YouTube channel which had over 125,000 followers and more than 8 million views. On this channel, he like posted videos, did live streams, videos often being about like ongoing crime cases, and interestingly God, because he's now a Christian. Well, he was always Christian, but like, you know, very much to God. As well as posting his old interviews. He essentially, because of this, became a celebrity, not only in his hometown, but in the whole of Brazil. He would often be stopped by people for selfies. He said even the police would now stop him in the street, but not to arrest him, but to shake his hand, because he's reformed and whatever. So for years, he lived an otherwise quiet life on the same farm from before with his dog, attending church, until etc. Until in March 2023, he was shot and killed in a drive-by near his sister's house. Not only did the two guys that are to this day unidentified shoot him, they also slit his throat to make sure he didn't survive. And this was at 10 a.m. Okay, so it isn't clear what the motives were, but his reputation probably suggests that this was not like an accidental killing and that his past rather caught up with him. So that was the end of Petey, but obviously since then he remained alive in many, many podcast episodes, various true crime shows, his story also being part of multiple books. Of course, the credit that will always be associated with him, which is him inspiring the book series Dexter. which were then followed by the show. Also, I think there's a manga, like a manga series or a book inspired by him. So that's his legacy. That's his legacy, and we love him for that, and we potentially don't love him for other things. But also, that is the weirdest part. He was like notorious at giving interviews, so many interviews, and obviously all the videos from his channel. But you know what? Not a single one in English. Like, there's not like proper translated interviews or like news reports.
Yeah.
He just like seems like the biggest thing in Brazil. And I knew about him like in the name before because he's obviously big. But like, I would have thought fans like us would have snapped this up, made like countless movies and like, you know, shows and whatever. But it's so difficult. I literally had to watch his interviews with YouTube auto translate on, and it's so bad. But anyway, so that was Pedro. And finally, you are free. You are free from me.
This was such a wild ride. I mean, my first question was, and you kind of answered it. Why is there not a movie like direct about what he did? Because Dexter, but I mean Dexter, I think it's kind of different story because he was working as a someone in police, so I guess inspired, okay, but I was listening to you and the scene, the blood red wedding, how you call it?
Oh, the red wedding, yeah.
I was imagining the scene from Kingsman.
Oh yeah.
They had this huge fight in the church, and I was like, this is such a movie material.
Yeah. All of it, really.
The whole
cutting
story.
Off the head. Everything. Multiple times where 5 dudes tried to ambush him and he's been killed too.
And as you said, he's tiny, so that would be such a good movie.
Well, I read somewhere that potentially he was working with like a director on a Netflix thing, but I don't know maybe it's in the making still, because it might have been 2023, and he was killed in March 2023, so it might be one in the works. But yeah, that's like shocking to me. Definitely many moments that could be made into a very good action movie.
Just take the story, and I guess there are like someone has the rights to the story or whatever. Maybe that it is in the making, but it's such a crazy story, and for me, I didn't hear it before, so I'm still shocked.
But you know, that's weird, because and this is like how my process usually works. I like find a story, maybe sometimes ChatGPT, sometimes like remembering episodes from other podcasts or whatever. This one I was like, I usually listen to like a few different podcasts at first to like get some interesting bits, and then I go and do my actual research on like the main thing, just not to retell anyone else's story. But with this one, I listened to a couple of podcasts, and I was like, because we didn't have a lot of time to prepare this episode, so I listened to a couple of podcasts, and they were quite quick, like 20-30 minutes, and they just like missed all the good stuff. So on the face it was like really boring, just some dude killing. Well, actually he never said. So he got charged with over 70 murders altogether, but he maintains that it was actually well over 100, and that's what makes him like one of the most prolific. But anyway, the podcasts were so boring, and they missing all of these stories out. So I was like really unsure if I should go with this episode. But then someone mentioned somewhere that there is a book. Obviously there's his own autobiography, but it's unfortunately in Portuguese, which I might know a few languages, but Portuguese is one. But then I found that there's actually a book about him, or like a part of a book about his story that is taken from that autobiography. Or like his interviews, so like his own words. So then I read that, and I was like, this is such an interesting story, but it's like so badly told in most places. And when I started getting into these stories, I was like, this is sick. And maybe that's why. Maybe everyone just looks up the fact that, oh yes, he inspired Dexter, he killed a lot of bad guys that he presumed to be bad guys, and that's it. But like the actual stories, are mad.
Yeah, there's first of all, it's so many stories. I mean, 70 people officially, and probably over 100, and all of them, or most of them, are like different.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a pattern or whatever, because as you said, he's like missionary killer, so he's just killing in so many different ways, in so many different settings. And the craziest part, he got into the jail at 18.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so most of us left in jail, sadly, for him. But I just love that for someone who's been in jail for like essentially all the centuries that the world took a turn between the old times and the modern times, he then just came out and became a YouTube superstar. It's like, how good for him to like assimilate like that.
Oh yeah.
That's mad. I can't get YouTube. He could.
And yeah, using social media after all this time, because it must be crazy coming out of jail and in 2007, and social media, it's in its peak.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. I'm still very much shocked.
I just have mixed feelings, so obviously he had a lot of supporters and stuff. Is it admirable that he was only killing bad guys? Or is it like... Because then there are interviews after he got released and found God and whatever. And he is a psychopath. He does not regret it. But someone asked him, like, do you regret killing your father? He was like, no, I would do it again. He was crying as he said that. But that's the point. He believes that he is in the right because that mission, like his moral compass, is like so deeply instilled in him that he didn't feel like he did anything bad. But then what are the chances, especially not in prison, actually in prison as well, but like what are the chances that everyone he's ever killed, if he's killed over 100 people, were actually bad people? Like the people in the wedding, maybe there were innocent people. People in Brazil famously go to prisons, and in the prisons they wait for their day in the court for like 3-4 years. So he might have killed people who were not even like guilty, and that's where the moral dilemma is.
There's quite a few people that were innocent or not like even bad enough for his standards. No, I still think it's not something you should do, and it doesn't.
Don't do it, kids.
Don't do it, kids. And it doesn't make it good that he only killed supposedly bad guys. No, it's not good.
No. But it's just like mind-blowing, and now I'm sad that I chose to do this for the English podcast rather than Lithuanian, because it's just like so mad, and I feel like no one properly knows about it. Like, this should be like the most fun serial killer story ever.
Yeah.
Fuck Ted Bundy. Jeffrey Dahmer probably also fuck compared to this. This is like an action movie. And then he fucking comes out and starts YouTube. And also, can we talk about the fact that someone gets 400 years in jail, but they're like, oh, but you actually can't be in prison for longer than 30 years.
The part with, the 43 years expectancy and like no more than 30 years in the prison. This is another kind of crazy in the story, but you are very right that people have to know this. This is for people who are interested in like true crime and stuff like that. This should be the number one story they heard, but I didn't hear it before. Okay, true crime is more of your thing, but still, I still enjoy it. So it's crazy.
You heard it first here, guys. Watch a Netflix something come out in the next week or so, and then we're fucking busted because we didn't break it. Well, just for avoidance of doubt, I was here first, 22nd of 11, 2024. I'm telling you the story, okay? Okay. Maybe not in the world, but in our part of the world, I feel like I'm just ahead of the curve. It happened in 73. Oh my god.
Wow.
Yeah, so there you go. Our new favorite serial killer.
Oh, for sure. I hope we will discover some more not that well-known killers.
Oh, I have a list. Just found today. Okay, so thank you very much for listening as I waffle on again for over an hour.
Thank you for the amazing story.
And I guess we'll hear you soon next time.
Thank you, subscribe, and have fun.
Don't kill anyone.
Please.
Bye.